Everyone, and thanks for joining us for CalBike's 2026 agenda reveal. I'm Kendra Ramsey. I'm the executive director of the California Bicycle Coalition. We are very excited to have you all here today to talk about what happened in 2025 and what we hope we will see in 2026. So we have a brief agenda, which is, I believe, on the next slide, and we will be talking through a few things, the recap, our priorities for the next year, opportunities to get involved, and we will have time set aside for your questions throughout the presentation. If you have questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box. Once we get to the end, I will be checking those out and posing them to our folks. Depending on how many folks we have in the room, we may be able to have folks raise hand and um, ask questions that way. But with the size of the group that we anticipate, that might not be possible. So just bear with us. Back to the prior slide. In case you're new to CalBike, thank you for being here. CalBike advocates for equitable, inclusive, and prosperous communities where bicycling helps enable all Californians to lead healthy and joyful lives. We like to say we're the voice of the bicyclist in the state capital. We're one among many, and we are happy to be in your company. And we want to see a future full of bicycles. So without further ado, why don't we get into our 2025 recap with our policy director, Jared Sanchez. Jared, floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Good to be here. Thank you all for showing up, supporting us, following our work. Really happy to be able to recap a little bit and give you a quick preview about what's up for us in 2026.
Just
Um,
want to note real quick that we are on the wrong screen. If we can get that corrected, please.
yes, I was going to mention that as well. Thank you. Just to jump in to it, well, let's wait for that slide first. Here we go. All right. So the first up here is around complete streets on Caltrans roads. In 2024, along with the leadership of Senator Scott Wiener, we were successful in passing a complete streets bill, which would further strengthen the requirements for Caltrans, our state transportation agency, if you're not familiar, to implement complete street facilities on its state right-of-way anytime it repaves it or improves it. This has been something, if you're not familiar already, a long time coming for us. We've been advocating for, and for many different reasons, we're successful in this last year in getting that bill signed by Governor Newsom. And now it's been so much about implementation of that. There's a lot of details about how that happens and through which funding pots and resources that happens through. But actually, in the next few months, Caltrans, along with the California Transportation Commission, will be releasing a draft report, a study about how they're doing in complete streets implementation. And so much of our work in this last year is really trying to make sure that implementation has been robust, making sure that the funding is there, making sure to respond to examples when perhaps it's been insufficient in some cases on our state highways, but it's going to be a continuing issue for us, something that we've worked on in the last year quite a bit. If you're not familiar, many of Caltrans roads are known as main streets, so places where people can bike and walk and are often the most dangerous parts of our road networks. Caltrans has been improving its ability through studies, needs assessments, devoting funding and resources to doing this. And we're just, of course, wanting to see more and more as this moves forward. So complete streets, as always, has been a key for us, and it will continue to be, as I'll mention, in our 2026 agenda as well. As far as new legislation or legislation that we sponsored last year, let's go back to the previous slide just to stick with the recap. There was two bills that we sponsored. The first was around quick build, trying to develop a pilot program within Caltrans to respond to the most dangerous conditions on the state highways by implementing short-term temporary fixes around infrastructure. There was a quick build pilot program authored by Assemblymember Burr, There was also a bill that we sponsored along with the leadership of Assembly Member Steve Bennett around bike highways, developing a bike highways program to develop uh, infrastructure in a way that would direct some funding to develop a few bike highways, which are long distance networks of connected bike trails, class one, class three, all sorts of facilities that would make it an interconnected network of ways to get around by bike. Unfortunately, both these bills made it about halfway through the process, were held up a lot for monetary or fiscal reasons, just given state budget. There's other reasons that we're really unfamiliar with about why those move forward. But we were happy to sponsor them. We want to continue, and I'll mention this in a minute about how we continue to hold Caltrans accountable in doing this administratively without perhaps requiring legislation, since there is already infrastructure in place for them to do so, and they're already doing so with other means. So we were happy to switch from legislative mode to thinking about how we can do this more through the agency of Caltrans and not having to mandate it. Um, Another big piece that we worked on in 25 is the budget, the state budget. There's about 20 billion dollars that the state uses for our transportation modes, and often is a major deficit when it comes to after active transportation funding for people biking, walking, or using transit. Um, the active transportation program is the hallmark program that where a lot of funding is directed to through the state down to local agencies. If you've been following our work, there's been cuts throughout the years without restoring funding that was promised years ago by the governor. So we've been trying to restore those funds, get more funds. The program is constantly oversubscribed, very popular program, usually the main source of funds in which kind of funnels down through the state down to the cities building out infrastructure, safer bike networks, everything that we care about here. And we certainly attempted to try to do that again. If you're not familiar, the state budget, not just within the transportation realm, but in many other pieces of the budget have been pretty dismal for a variety of reasons. But just also about the priorities laid out, specifically in the transportation realm. We see continuing funds going to highway expansion, for example, and seeing a deficit or at least a decrease in funds in alternative modes of transportation. Um, there's a whole nother conversation around public transit and public transportation funding that we've been involved in that has its own struggles to get more funding. But with just within the biking and walking realm, we're very much involved in the budget process, trying to get as much funds as possible to make sure to see the safe streets that we all want to see and use. Talk about funding and also other modes of transportation. E-bikes is a very hot topic as it continues to be, as popularity continues to grow for people using e-bikes. Um, there's many different things I could say. Kind of, we've been proactive on this in many ways, trying to respond to what we deemed as illegal electric motorcycles or e-motos. These are devices that often masquerade as legal e-bikes, trying to sponsor legislation to correct that, clarify the vehicle code about what these devices are. The other aspect is around funding. If you're familiar, the California Resources Board administers a program, an e-bike incentive program that gives vouchers to low-income folks in California. There was about 10 million plus another 20 million in the pot for vouchers to go to folks. And just recently, we saw a switch in funding priorities out of CARB at the direction of the state budget, of course, to decrease funds for vouchers. However, we've been trying to strengthen that program. We want to see greater reiterations of that program since the foundation is already made for that, and want to continue budget advocacy in this realm. While at the same time not trying to limit existing law on e-bikes. There's a three-class system in place that we've advocated for years now. There's been plenty of kind of piecemeal bills or legislation that have been trying to address e-bike safety concerns. Often we hear from constituents in coastal parts of California around targeting youth who are often perhaps seen as riding recklessly or unsafely, which there's a lot of debate and concerns about if that's true or not, what the data shows, if the data is even clear enough about what the problem is. There's a new study coming out about e-bikes that'll give us a better picture about this. But no doubt we've been involved in this space as again as it comes to us, and then of course as we see the potential for to see growing popularity to get out of the car, give people another way to get around by transportation, and seeing e-bikes as a growing fleet of technology of ways to get around. E-bikes are a very important piece for that. So, it's a quick recap. Certainly did many other things in the year. Would love to get your questions about further clarifying the things I mentioned or the things I didn't. And let's move on to the next slide for what's up for 2026. No surprise, more money for bikes. Um, as I mentioned, we were looking to restore millions of dollars within the active transportation program. However, that's not the only program that our state agencies can fund active transportation infrastructure or education or investment of any kind into biking and walking. There are other funding sources within the transportation field, other funding programs that can be better leveraged to fund bike networks, bike highways, quick build. There's plenty of different little avenues that we can focus on, and we will continue to do that. Of course, trying to strengthen the e-bike incentive project program is a key priority for us in the next coming years to find leadership within our legislature who want to make sure to see that happen in the state budget, really advocating and prioritizing that is going to be key. Working with others in coalition around this, we have many partners in this space who are also very adamant that we want to see more money for bikes, e-bikes included, that would be, of course, important to make safer streets in terms of the implementation needed for complete streets that I mentioned earlier within the shop, which is the rehabilitation repaving program for Caltrans and the California Transportation Commission. And we need to continue to see more money for people biking and walking. I think I mentioned earlier, often 1% or less of our state budget is spent on biking and walking. We've seen increases and alignments with trying to connect our transportation spending with our climate goals and air pollution goals. Bikes, of course, are a key part of that. And we want to make sure that we have champions in legislature, champions within the governor's office and the governor himself to continue to make this priority, even in tight fiscal years, as we see plenty of room and flexibility within the transportation budget as it continues to grow, as it increases funds from the federal level to dedicate that and devote it to active transportation. So billions of dollars for bikes is certainly still very much in a priority for us. The next one is around e-bikes again, kind of playing in response to a lot of the concerns we hear. We're hoping to find authors within the legislature to really focus on these issues of e-motos or illegal electric motorcycles, what we talked about that often give a bad image, a bad name to legal e-bikes, are often very unsafe as they go well past the legal requirements of what an e-bike is and are some of the most dangerous actors on our streets. There's plenty of deceptive sales practices by manufacturers and sellers that we hope to clarify and to focus on to make sure that these devices are either properly regulated or off the streets altogether. But they are, along with other growing modes of technology in the transportation space, a growing piece, and we want to make sure how to integrate those safely in many different ways. And I can talk more about that if there's questions, since this is often a topic of discussion. I guess the one last thing I'll say is there's often a backlash against e-bikes and people on bikes in general at the local level. A couple cities in California have developed new regulations that go well beyond some of the current concerns around e-bikes that also affect bike riders. So we want to make sure that we don't limit access and the use of legal e-bikes. We want to promote that. And I think many leaders at the local, regional, and state level want that as well, but still trying to find a balance about how to do that at the state level since there are state laws governing e-bike use. So much more to say and do in that space. not to mention the work that we're doing kind of behind the scenes with experts and folks working in this field around how to better understand e-bikes, e-mobility in general, and how to make it safe, accessible, and increase the use of it, while also making sure that we have everybody responsible, educated, and riding safely. Lastly, other pieces of work we want to focus on is around road safety to reduce traffic violence statewide. Vulnerable road users, people walking and biking, are disproportionately uh, unsafe or at least threatened on our streets, given their lack of encasement in a car, disproportionately impacted by street violence. We want to focus on legislation that holds Caltrans and other state agencies more accountable when traffic violence occurs on our streets and our state right of way. We want to think about other ways that streets can be redesigned to make them more accessible, more oriented towards community and less to moving cars through in and out. And we want to focus on, as I mentioned earlier, thinking about ways that Caltrans and other state agencies can administer or at least think about differently how they can implement quick build projects aligned with bike highway infrastructure and networks within existing constraints of the Caltrans budget, which is something that they're already doing, but certainly would love to see them doing more on that. So as legislation gets firmed up the next couple months, we're hoping to sponsor a couple bills. We'll be working again administratively, again behind the scenes with state agencies to implement complete streets, as I mentioned earlier, to make sure that is moving forward, even as we see, a dismal picture of what the budget looks like and kind of how our state agencies continue to prioritize the existing funds that are there and making sure that we see that shift. So I think I feel complete. I'll stop there. Let's move on to some other things we're working on in the next year.
Hello, folks. My name is Kevin Claxton. I'm CalBike's Advancement Director. I'm going to let you know really quickly about the 2026 California Bicycle Summit. The summit is CalBike's biennial conference event. So next year, the event will be returning to Sacramento, California, Thursday, April 23rd, Friday, April 24th. We'll have two inspiring days of workshops, panel discussions, keynote addresses, guided bike rides, and good old-fashioned bicycle fun. I hope you will save the date and we'll see you there. Just to give you a point of reference, past participants include representatives from 50 plus community organizations, transportation and mobility partners, 30 plus transportation agencies and MPOs. So it's a great opportunity to sharpen your bicycle planning and advocacy toolkit and make some great connections to help us move this work forward. We do have early bird tickets available now. A limited quantity are remaining. I'm going to drop a link in the chat for you all. If you want to learn a little bit more about the event, you'll find the button to register on that page and preview of some of the great content that we'll have happening next April. So again, that's April 23rd, 24th, 2026 in Sacramento. I hope we will see you there. And returning to the event this year for the first time in at least a little while is the event's optional lobby day. If we could move to the next slide, please. So if you're interested in participating in our optional lobby day, what that is going to mean, it's going to include a little advanced webinar training, a training session on the morning of the event, Wednesday, April 22nd. And CalBike is going to set you up with a few key campaign issues, talking points, some printed takeaways. We're going to book you into meetings with your local legislator offices, and then we're going to connect you with other folks who are participating so that you can head over to the Capitol Mall and the Capitol Building, participate in some small group meetings to present some key bicycle and roadway safety issues to your legislators. So that optional lobby day will happen Wednesday, April 22nd, the day before the summit. And I hope if you're, that's open to attendees of the full summit. So if you're attending the summit, I hope you'll consider joining us on that Wednesday to take some of these issues straight to the California Capitol. If we can move to the next slide, I'm going to let you know just about the number one way that you can help us turn this ambitious agenda for 2026 into reality, and that's by making a gift to support CalBike's work and becoming a member. And the most powerful way you can support our work is by becoming a monthly member. So a gift of any amount goes a long way, but a monthly gift, a recurring gift, ensures we have the resources that we need to do this work month in and month out throughout the year. I hope you will consider joining or renewing your membership. We've got some cool perks, fun CalBike swag and merch available at a variety of gift levels. If you want to learn more, you can head to www.calbike.org/join, and we've got all the information you'll need there. I hope you'll consider becoming a member. Our most significant wins are truly powered by everyday folks like you. That's signing petitions, taking action, contacting your legislators, and your individual gifts truly power our mission. So thank you in advance. I hope you'll consider making a gift. I think we're going to move back to some Q&A and a little more discussion about our agenda for the year. If you have questions, please type those into the Q&A box, and we will do our best to respond and have a little discussion about those now.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. And I'm very excited as the CalBike staff person in Sacramento. I'm very excited to bring everyone here and get to explore with our local partners and everyone else the great things going on here. So we've been getting a number of questions. We have answered some of them in the chat, mostly to get links that are helpful. I want to point to a few of those now, mention them, and also get some follow-up from folks. So we have a few questions that are more, recommendations for policies, and this is great. We are always looking for ideas. Sometimes there may be things that we've already tried, but it is always good to know that people are still interested in seeing these things. One example of this is David Norman mentioned that drivers often use their horns to startle or harass bicyclists, and that these folks should be arrested and charged appropriately, which is a threat to bicyclist safety. This is a super frustrating issue. There is a model for both an anti-harassment ordinance at a local level and a statewide vulnerable road user law. There are some local agencies in California. I believe everyone should be able to see the Q&A, so the links will be available. There are some local agencies that have anti-harassment ordinances, and those are essentially put forward so that if you can sort of prove that this person was harassing you as a bicyclist and they're caught, that is a way that they can be charged. The statewide vulnerable road user law is more focused on the serious injury and death to a bicyclist after the fact, unfortunately. That is something, again, that a few states have adopted. I believe, in prior years, we have discussed this with legislators and sort of not gotten buy-in to introduce it. But it is, like I said, always good to hear folks supporting these issues and knowing to keep these things in the hopper as future ideas. Another that I wanted to bring up for discussion is Ken Kirshner asked, what lessons from your advocacy for quick build legislation can we use for local quick build project advocacy? He says we have a concept for a pilot in El Camino Real bikeway project in Menlo Park. And so one link that I did respond with is CalBike produced a quick build guide actually during the pandemic around both helping local advocates understand what quick build is and how they can advocate for it, and also just kind of a toolkit on this is what quick build is, this is how you implement it locally. But I'd love to see if, potentially, Jared, if you have any thoughts on how sort of that advocacy process at the state level and the discussions you had with partners might help folks when they're talking to their local cities or counties. I'll also say, while Jared gets off mute and all that there are a lot of good examples throughout the state of agencies that are implementing quick build. I recently saw a presentation in Oakland. I won't say that these agencies are doing as much as everyone would like to see. We'd like to see a lot of these happening to improve safety, but there are some folks who are are making strides in this area.
Yeah, and just to add, I would say some cities are, I would say, doing more advanced work than the state is currently doing. There's very little priority for quick build, which is why we sponsored that piece of legislation within Caltrans. There's several millions of dollars that are being used, but we're not quite clear about how much is being used for our most vulnerable road users rather than people's in cars and signage for people's in cars. So it's ongoing work. I think, yeah, I think, and I saw this as a question around complete streets on state right of way and how that intersects with local streets and roads. I think the more that we can share local, I guess, advocates at the local, regional, and state level, ways to work together to really hold these public agencies intertwined as they are and accountable, that we're all working on the same page with, very similar funding sources that are being used to fund many similar things within the active transportation space. I think whether it's quick build, complete streets, addressing traffic violence issues through, or I saw another question around expanding networks around bike highways or something similar to bike highways. I think collaborating all together at different geographies is key in doing that. Um, yeah, I don't have. There's so much I wish the state could do more into voting around quick build, but I think in many cases it is some of our cities that are leading that. And I think an update is definitely due from the pandemic, the one that Kendra mentioned that we released to see what cities have been doing since, because we've seen some taking that back in many ways around slow streets or other ways that our streets were adapted to the conditions at that time, where we would love to see more of that, of course, increase. So I'll stop there.
Great. Yeah, and I did want, Jared, you touched on this a little bit. Arliss Reynolds asked about how can sort of local advocates work with Caltrans to try to force them to improve complete streets projects. We do, not infrequently get contacted by folks who are having challenges with local projects. I will say that, SB 960, the Complete Streets Bill, was a big win. It does not apply to projects that were already in the pipeline, right? And so, some of these projects have already, they have their plans going, they've been approved, they have funding and all that. They're sort of a train moving through the station. And, but, we still have a role to improve future projects.
Just to add to that,
Yeah.
I often, not often, but would love to be contacted by folks who are, yeah, involved on a at a local level on perhaps a state right of way where Caltrans is involved. I get
Mhm.
contacted somewhat frequently, but would love to be more. We've worked with local advocates on many different streets to make sure all the players are in the room and the conversations are had about where this project is in the pipeline, where funding is being dedicated, what sort of improvements are needed, where the opposition is, and where the blocks are at the state level. And would love for you to contact us as we continue to implement those streets. That's part of that bill. And again, that I don't know if I mentioned this, but the implementation of that is just as important as passing the bill itself, if not more. So would love for you all to collaborate on that, since it's hard to keep track of all the projects that are happening
Mhm.
across the state, especially when you're so intimately tied with them.
Right. And it's another place where I'll plug. If you're not already connected to your local bike coalition, they are who we often work with on these issues. I know not everywhere in the state has one, but frequently there are folks in local bike coalitions who are, doggedly meeting with local agencies and Caltrans on these projects. They've been following them for years. As Jared said, we're happy to get brought in when it's helpful. Um, because part of implementation really is knowing when it's not going well and trying to help identify the process problems. So where is it falling short? At what part of the process is that complete streets element not happening? So that's definitely definitely a great thing to remember. So we have, and Kevin, thank you. Kevin just put a link in the chat to our list of partners throughout the state. If you know of a local bike coalition that's not on there, please let us know. Um, but there are lots of great ones throughout the state. We have a few questions that have come in on recommendations on e-bikes. It's definitely a big topic. So I'll go to the first one from Frances Barber. Hi, Frances. And she says that the e-bike class system is too confusing. Can we revamp it? She has a class three pedal assist, but people think it's too fast for like a class one pathway, which is misleading because the user is the one controlling the speed. And most, many regular bikes can exceed the speed especially on downhills. And so, um, yeah, I think that is one of the issues that many people bring up with the three class system. We have had many conversations about what are the challenges with the regulatory platform and how can they be solved and what happens to the devices that are out there right now if they no longer comply with any future updates. And those are all big questions. And I think one of the things that often comes up is that the difference between throttle bikes and non-throttle bikes, the speed, those sorts of things. And, I will say that we are actively working. We've launched the California Independent Electric Mobility Council. And what we're doing there is working with a group of stakeholders from a broad range of perspectives. So we have um, emergency services, medical professionals, we have folks from um, state agencies, we have public health represented, we have folks from the motorcycle industry, basically, which is on the other side of that spectrum of what's an e-bike. Some of these things are faster than e-bikes. Are they actually motorcycles? There's a lot of gray area there. And some others involved who do local work around bicycling and road safety. And what we're looking to come to is sort of a common understanding of what these regulatory issues are and what are some potential solutions. I would say it's a corollary to what the e-bike safety study that Jared mentioned at the beginning in his presentation that's being conducted by the Mineta Institute. Basically, furthering that conversation and trying to understand what the priorities of these different perspectives would be, because often, when legislation comes to the table, um, concerns from other parties that you may not be aware of are things that can stand in the way of success in getting that adopted. So kind of having this conversation up front and trying to determine what are some potential avenues for improvement. And also coming up with what are the messaging strategies? What are the things the public needs to know that if we socialize these things, we can create a safer system for everyone, whether they're on a bike, um, on maybe a faster device that could be reclassified and people would understand what the device was able to do, and maybe if it has a speed above what is a legal e-bike, all those sorts of things. So that group will be producing a report around May of next year, and we look forward to sharing that with everyone. Another e-bike comment comes from Michael Swire, who says e-bike regulation at the local level is out of hand. It's not based in data. It focuses on education and discourages safe use. Would love to see a model local ordinance program from CalBike that gets in front of the issues so that cities have some guidance instead of simply adopting what neighboring cities have done. Yes, we definitely feel this. I've gotten two requests this week from local agencies interested in adopting an ordinance who have said, what are the best practices? My council is directing us to do this. What are your perspectives? And we do have we have seen across the state that many of these local ordinances are sort of restating the California Vehicle Code, which is sort of not necessary in a local ordinance. It doesn't improve the ability to enforce the vehicle code by restating it locally. It could be helpful to locally produce a guide on, what are the traffic laws that apply? Are there certain situations in that locality that different rules apply? That sort of thing. But restating the vehicle code, it doesn't create any additional requirements. But the challenge with some of these ordinances is they can criminalize bicycling behavior. We've seen ordinances that the fine for certain traffic infractions are double that of what a driver would face. And so that is, an undue burden on bicyclists. Clearly, we don't want to see anyone driving unsafely, riding unsafely, and breaking the law. but finding a bicyclist double that of a car driver doesn't make a lot of common sense in terms of roadway safety. So, we definitely recommend that folks focus on things that should be regulated at the local level. That is, typically improving signage where you are seeing poor behavior and you want people to better be adopting, what is actually the law. So local cities do have the ability to regulate bicycle use on sidewalks. By default, it isn't illegal, but cities can designate places where it is, if that's appropriate. There are, other places where signage can help when there are challenging behaviors. But really, what we want to see is there to be a predictable, statewide set of requirements that people can sort of understand and know when they're on their daily journeys. They don't have to look up at a street sign to know, okay, I've now moved into a different city on my daily commute, and so my behavior needs to change. That isn't how people operate in their day-to-day lives. So we have to long answer, we have put together a toolkit on, why we feel these local ordinances are not helpful and how local advocates can sort of put together arguments to shape them and help keep them from overly penalizing bicyclists. I can drop the link in response to this question as well. And that is available to help whether you're a local advocate or you want to send it to a local staff member and give them an option. But I do love the idea of, getting a little bit more detail out there for local agencies. Let's see. And we have a question from Mark Glenisk, asking, have entities that control access to possible trails alongside railways ever worked with CalBike to create routes for bikes? For example, on the Central Coast between Santa Margarita and San Miguel, cyclists have to use a sometimes dangerous on-highway route, but it would be very easy to create a bike path next to the rails. That's a great question. I think there are many places where we are definitely supportive of this from a size of our organization perspective. You are seeing our entire full-time team here on this call. Jared, myself, Kevin, and Andrew. So we have not been significantly involved in sort of these local trail development projects. There are some sort of larger trail systems that we're able to get involved with. But I think one way that we do love to support when there are efforts to do this. There's the US Bicycle Route System. There's a number of different organizations who work on this issue, as well as local organizations. So we're very supportive of this. We're very, happy to get involved where we can be helpful, but it isn't something that we're typically involved in a lot just because of, lack of our capacity to do so.
Maybe just to jump in on that one, and the way to expand our reach is collaborating with groups that Kendra mentioned. The Rails to Trails Conservancy has a state office. They work at local levels too. I know in the Bay Area here, they're really active in expanding trails. So this is something that's always on our radar, trying to work with others to, like I mentioned, to really expand our reach given our limited capacity in this area. And it's something that Caltrans is in some ways obligated by law to survey, to study more, to investigate about the alternatives to highways that are adjacent paths that can be used for people biking or walking. So, in terms of our bike highways bill, this very much aligns with that, and will follow with the administrative work, following up with the agency itself to see what it's doing in terms of what it says in its plans around bike highways and using other methods and modes to get people around. So I love that question, and definitely to be more work to be done on that.
Awesome. We have some suggestions for legislation, which I love to hear. So George um, recommends banning Waze and other wayfinding apps from including local streets in their directions. I think I think we would not be the only interest area that would be interested in that. That is not something I don't know that we've thought about that before. So thanks, George. It's definitely something to think about. Another from Bruce, I would like to see legislation to allow cyclists to ride through a T intersection where the cyclist has their own lane, regardless of a stop sign or traffic light. It does not make sense to make a cyclist stop when there is no conflict. Um, this also seems like a no-brainer. I think many of us are familiar with the concept of the Idaho stop or the safety stop, where if there is a four-way, if there's a stop sign and a bicyclist is approaching and there is no oncoming traffic, they could then proceed safely after, slowing and looking. You all know that that has been unsuccessful despite multiple attempts by CalBike over the years. And this idea for a T intersection actually seems like a probably more palatable version of that, because there is literally no oncoming, there's no, potential for um, oncoming traffic. Could certainly add that to the, idea around Idaho, the safety stop in California. Definitely something to consider there as well. Um, we have recommendation from Jim Ross. Hi, Jim. Will CalBike follow CABA? So that's the California Association of Bicycling Associations. I'm getting that wrong. I'm sorry. Very, group that was founded, I think, before CalBike, is a lot of the bicyclists throughout California. To encourage Caltrans to update design guidance for Class 4 separated bikeways, appropriate signage to distinguish Class 2 from Class 4, laws for no vehicle parking or driving on Class 4, better guidance on intersection design to reduce right hook, or left cross hazards, and better guidance regarding raised barriers to reduce crash hazard and preserve daylighting. I think so let's see. I'm happy to talk more, Jim. We should definitely connect, probably overdue. I think that, there's a number of ways. So CalBike is on the California Walk Bike Technical Advisory Committee. So when Caltrans is willing to open up and update design guidance, we do, organize a lot of comments. There was a recent update of some design guidance, and we actually, put a Google Doc version up, shared it on our website, and said, if folks have things they'd like to see changed in this policy, please let us know, and we can add those to our comments to Caltrans. So we are definitely on board with updating guidance to make things better for bicyclists, updating design guidance. So I think I'd love to talk about all these ideas in more depth. I think we have a lot of common goals there. And man, no vehicle parking or driving on Class 4s. I feel like that's already illegal. I wish we could get that enforced. I definitely wish we could get that enforced. Definitely. Great ideas. I have a question here from Pete Gang. Please talk about the first in the nation shared streets bill, SB 5595, that was recently signed into law in Washington state. Bringing similar legislation to California would give local jurisdictions the authority to designate streets as shared streets, 10 mph max speed, and peds and bike have priority over motorized vehicles. Great suggestion, Pete. I know that we have talked about the shared streets idea at length. In 2025, we included it in the list of ideas we were shopping around early in the year to legislators, and unfortunately didn't get support to introduce it. Since then, the Washington bill was passed, and so we have had a few conversations. We've also talked with some local advocates that are working to get their local legislator. They kind of spearheaded the process on their own as well, to get a legislator to introduce this bill. I haven't heard if that, it's a little bit early to know whether things are actually going to be introduced or not. I don't know, uh, Jared, if you have any other comments on this, but this is definitely something on our radar. And like was mentioned, for any of you not familiar, it's a basically a law that takes the slow streets idea a little bit further and gives people on foot and people on bike the priority in the roadway, where even on slow streets, cars do still have the right of way, right? You as a pedestrian or bicyclist are still yielding to vehicles, although, it is a much more low stress environment. Jared, sorry, you were going to jump in.
Just to say that we're actively lobbying offices around this, given the recent Washington law. I think there's a lot of renewed interest around this. Just getting a foothold within state statute within California to give at least some place, just not just in crosswalks where people are biking and walking, the priority would be a great start. A lot of this, I'll say, is up to local jurisdictions and the desire, the need or want to establish a program. When the Slow Streets program was established, it was led by a few cities. San Francisco still has, I would say, the most in-depth Slow Streets program. So really need a lot of leadership from the local level to to want to establish a shared streets program that they have identified in their city or ways to do this is going to be just as important rather than just finding a state legislator to carry it. So if you have connection to your local transportation agency or any local elected officials are interested in this and want to dial it up to change state law on that would be, I think, the first start to do that. And we still have a few months to get something for this year. And there's been a lot of, yeah, warm interest in folks in offices on this idea. But again, need that local support to make it happen.
Don't go away, Jared. We have questions on e-bikes.
Yes.
Okay, so we have two buckets here. We'll get to the e-bike incentive project. I saw a few questions on that, but first, I wanted to go to the question from Angelica Roca about e-bikes. So she says agencies and school districts across the state are establishing local policies that further restrict access around age or riding to school. What do you make of this? Are there specific policies or programs you see as a best practice? How do we balance communities' desire to restrict access or impose age restrictions rather than fund education programs and build infrastructure? I definitely have thoughts, but Jared, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, big questions. We haven't done a survey or collected all the different examples at the local level or school districts that are implementing these programs. I think they have a lot of hope, success tied to them. From what we hear, that some children are like, if they don't have a permit or their device is not a legal e-bike, they're still riding them like adjacent to the school and locking them up elsewhere. So I'm not sure how well implemented or successful they've been, but I would love to connect more with local advocates or folks who've been following local examples at schools to, yeah, to survey, lift those up to see what has been most successful, what's working, what's not. At the state level, that's something harder to regulate or legislate around schools. Another separate effort being led by California Walks and many others is trying to develop some requirements about how to bring active transportation education back within the education system for schools. So teaching small children and even bigger children about rules of the road, how to navigate streets safely, really devoting part of our education curriculum to the changing landscape of what our streets are and how more modes should be and are being made available and making sure that our young people are paying attention to that and not just getting, driver education, but thinking about other ways to move around. So there's a lot in the education kind of school space that is difficult to navigate just because it's so much around local control issues. And again, another issue that I would love to collaborate more with local folks on. Um, but yeah, I don't think I have much more to say to that. I'm curious, Kendra, what you might add.
Yeah, I think Angelica, in your area, I know the San Diego County Bike Coalition does some great education around e-bikes with Mr. Kevin. And I think that it's sort of a both and. I think the education programs are great. I think, from sort of an old school safe routes to school background, I have always sort of instinctively opposed requirements for kids to park their bikes on campus because I feel like anything that is going to limit kids' ability to get around on bike limits their access to transportation, it limits their choices, and it can potentially be detrimental for folks that have no other option. Um, However, I think having bike education available, especially for free in schools, is a great opportunity. And I think we have a lot of local bike coalition partners who contract with both school districts and local cities to provide that education. Um, and with it is even given that safe routes to school sort of mindset of traditionally we were told like that restricting bicycles on campus um, can be detrimental, but given the advent of e-bikes and the sort of reality that a lot of children are not getting don't have access to the proper sort of skills training and that sort of thing, having that available at schools is definitely a great idea. I don't know that requiring it and banning kids from riding, like Jared said, a lot of them are just parking outside campus. I think that differs from community to community. I've heard some communities say, oh, these bikes are expensive. They're not parking them in an unsafe spot. But then I've heard other people say, oh, no, we just see them around the corner. Um, so I don't think that there's a one size fit all approach that we've sort of heard of, although we've talked to a number of different organizations doing this type of education. I think there are a lot of good ones out there. And um, yeah, definitely, I think there's an interesting paradox that when there is something that is concerning folks around car driving, typically the solution is to make it easier to drive a car. Where if there's something concerning around riding a bike, the typical solution is to make it harder to ride a bike. And I think that that is, the opposite of what we should be doing. We should be figuring out how we can make things more safe, how we can get the right education, and like with the local agency e-bike restriction question before, really figuring out, instead of spending our time further restricting people's ability to ride bikes, can we put that energy and resource into creating opportunities for them to learn? So that's not a total answer to your question, but it's the one I have. um, and let's see, we have a few questions about the California e-bike incentive project, which as folks will possibly remember, was something CalBike advocated for. It introduced a pilot program to fund point of sale e-bike incentives, so discounts on e-bikes for income qualified people throughout California. It had some challenges to being implemented and did successfully have two application windows where for each window there were 1,000 to 1,500 vouchers available and over 100,000 people got in line to apply. So clearly there's a need. And unfortunately, the California Air Resources Board uh, essentially was forced by one of the budget bills last year to reallocate the remaining e-bike incentive funds to the Clean Cars for All project. So the challenge there is Clean Cars for All does allow you to buy an e-bike, but you do have to trade in a polluting car. So it does not serve the same market and is, not a quick and, not an option for people who need access to an e-bike and don't have those other things to trade in. So, we are, and Jared can speak more to this, we've had meetings with the administrators, the folks at CARB who are over this program. We've had conversations with other branches at CARB who oversee other mobility programs. We are, working with partners on developing a budget strategy for next year that does incorporate these incentives and other mobility incentives into the budget alongside our requests for additional funding for active transportation infrastructure. Jared, I'll just hand it to you because you've been more involved in that.
Yeah, I would say a key thing, and would love to brainstorm with folks on this call, and perhaps after, about finding legislative champions on this. Assemblymember Tasha Burner in the San Diego County area was a champion on this a few years ago. She's not the only bike champion in the state legislature, and so much of our work at CalBike is nurturing or cultivating members to really speak up for bikes, be our voice in the Capitol. And this is a key issue for that, especially as the budget negotiations and working through the budget process, the subcommittees, the leadership within that. So much is going to rely on that we have those champions really pushing that. So if you have local connections to the district offices for perhaps members that have see a lot of e-bike issues or have a lot of interest in e-bikes, I think is going to be one of the most key elements. Well beyond any strategy that us advocates and again working with several other organizations on this who are very passionate about the topic. There's only so much we can do without the support from members and many members, in fact, in getting sign-ons from different legislative members to make sure this is a priority is going to be key, especially since as CARB is responding to recent budget bill legislation from this last year about the reallocation of funds. We need to work collaboratively with different groups within the electric vehicle world, but also folks at the local level and finding members to make this a priority for them. So we see a lot of value, as Kendra mentioned, in the infrastructure or the foundation developed within the incentive program. Of course, there are things to be worked out through, but would love to fully fund, at least bring more money back to that program itself.
We have about 3 minutes left, so I'm scrolling through the questions. I know there's a lot of good questions in here. We won't be able to get to all of them. I I know there are a lot of um, very specific questions about how things are getting implemented, especially with SB 960 and um, how we're working on that, especially when in the project life cycle, outside feedback is most impactful. From April, that's a great question. I think that, one of the things that admittedly Caltrans is doing a lot of work on is their engagement process. And we have been working with them in our quarterly meetings on SB 960, as well as through a couple of other avenues on that engagement and kind of solving the paradox of when the project is defined and has a scope, adding things that aren't in the scope is typically seen as not possible. For example, complete streets elements, but there is no public process before there's a project scope. So it's sort of a paradox on when in the process can people engage, and we are working to help influence how they're defining what is a project, when is it conceptualized, and giving people more options to comment. There's an engagement portal that they've just launched that's being sort of piloted around the state, and a couple of other opportunities that hopefully will be out there soon. But um, another question, let's see. There's so many questions and we have 1 minute left. I would love to, continue the conversation. We'll see if, some of these can, we can potentially put up a few answers when we are able to get the recording up on our website. Really appreciate everyone attending. We had a great group in the room. Really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. And from all of us, we really hope to see you at the California Bicycle Summit in Sacramento in April. Should be lovely weather. It won't be 115 degrees yet.